There is a door in the northern stacks that swells every winter, though no rain has touched it for centuries. It is oak bound in black iron, old enough that 3 different locksmithing traditions have left their opinions upon it, and none has fully prevailed. In summer, it opens with a patient groan, as befits a respectable archival door. In winter, it resists. The grain tightens, the hinges complain in a sharper key. The latch catches as though the wood itself has remembered some older duty and would prefer not to yield the shelves beyond to casual hands. Every few cold months, some earnest apprentice suggests oil, sanding, a plane, replacement, modernization, or whatever fresh euphemism the age has invented for harming a useful old thing in the name of convenience. I never permit it. A door that resists in winter is educational. It reminds the hand that matter itself changes behavior under strain. It rebukes the southern assumption that design alone governs use. It teaches the correct northern lesson. A structure is not what it was on the day it was finished. A structure is what weather, time, neglect, repairs and necessity allow it to remain. So too with regions, so too with peoples, so too, most especially, with that immense and troublesome category so many soft-handed chroniclers call simply the North. Welcome back to the Hidden Stacks. I am Irillian Cantonine, Baelnorn Law Warden, sworn keeper of difficult continuities, cataloguer of proud mistakes, and unenthusiastic custodian of the fact that a surprising number of civilizations mistake surviving their own circumstances for proof that they have understood them. This is the Lich's tale, a Faerûn Lorecast. We remain in our second season, Realms Between Ruins, the long age of kingdoms. In our first season, we traced the greater sweep of Faerûn from mythic contradiction and primordial powers through creator-race dominions, draconic and giant antiquity, the grandeur and catastrophe of the elder elven world, the crown wars, the long founding time, the rise and fall of great empires, the gamble of myth Drana, the factions that slipped across borders like durable knives, the time of troubles, the spell plague, and the second sundering's bruised restoration. Then this season turned to inheritance. Who received the ruins? Who claimed them? Who misread them? Who built upon the bones of the old world and called the resulting arrangement new? Last time we went south and farther than many northern maps admit they need to think. We spoke of Chult and the southern sea roads, of sacred geographies misnamed as wilderness, of Mesro and Omu, of merchant hunger, foreign misreading, local resistance, and that particular imperial stupidity which assumes that if a place is not organized according to your own categories, then it must be empty, backward, or awaiting profitable improvement. I reminded you that maps lie most effectively not by falsehood, but by omission. Tonight, we turn in almost the opposite direction, and yet the moral correction remains oddly similar. For the North is perhaps the most romanticized lie on the map. Not because it is unreal, quite the contrary. It is real in the most abrasive way imaginable. Cold is real, distance is real, orcs are real. Mountain passes closed by snow do not become metaphors merely because a bard improves the phrasing. Timber shortages, failed harvests, isolated steadings, troll-haunted roads, wolf-ridden winters, and iron that must be dug, smelted, shaped, carried, and defended before anyone may call himself civilized for owning a sword. All of these are quite real indeed. But over the centuries, later cities, later heroes, later adventurers, and later storytellers have polished the North into a kind of moral backdrop. A place where hard men become practical, where small towns breed courage, where the frontier purifies decadence, where danger is bracing rather than filthy, and where the map's unfinished spaces are imagined as invitations instead of arguments. That, my patient apprentice, is nonsense. The North before it becomes the North is not a stage waiting for legends. It is a long collision among climates, old kingdoms, ruins, migrant peoples, dwarven roads, elven withdrawals, sea raider habits, tribal memory, and settlements stubborn enough to call themselves permanent while living one failed winter away from revision. It is not born from danger as a heroic exception. It is shaped by danger as an ordinary condition. Tonight we shall speak of the early and middle history of the savage frontier and the larger North, before later familiarity softens it. We shall speak of the old elven realms, whose roads and griefs still underlie later clearings, of Delzoun and the dwarven genius for turning stone into continuity, of Ilisk and the seafaring stock that gave much of the region its human tone, of Netherese refugees building one sort of city atop the memory of another, of Uthgar and the Uthgard whose mounds and totems refused southern categories, of the uneasy relation between settlements and the wilderness around them, and of that useful truth civilized powers dislike hearing. Frontier is often merely the polite name a kingdom gives to land where other people, other dead, and other claims remain inconveniently present. This episode is brought to you by Dharma Web Solutions. In a world where institutions so often expand faster than their records, where councils inherit systems they do not understand, and where the phrase "we will patch it later" has preceded a remarkable number of historical embarrassments, it is a relief to recommend builders who respect clarity, maintenance, and structural thought. For durable, maintainable web design and development, visit dharmawebsolutions.com. A northern road that cannot survive spring thaw was never truly a road. A site that cannot survive growth, revision, and actual human use was never truly designed. It was merely announced. Now then, draw your chair closer to the brazier, if you possess blood enough to appreciate one. The shelves ahead smell of cedar, old vellum, lamp smoke, and a very faint tang of rust. Appropriate, I think, for the subject. The North has always smelled a little of metal under weather. The first mistake is the article, the North. As though one were naming a single polity, a clear culture, a resolved landscape, a coherent historical actor. That habit is old. Southerners prefer clean directions because they save them the labor of learning names. One hears similar laziness in the treatment of the East, the South, the Moon Sea, even the Inner Sea sometimes, as though the map kindly arranges itself into a child's moral cabinet of regions. Yet the lands north of Waterdeep, north of the Delimbir, north and east around the High Forest, the Rauvin, the Desserin headwaters, the trackless sea islands, the spine of the world's long menace, and the shadowed ways beneath all this stone were never one thing, merely because someone colder than Cormyr happened to dwell there. What later generations called the North, and more specifically the savage frontier and adjoining northern lands, was a mosaic of partial authorities. A dwarven hold might control a mountain road and the trade values attached to it, yet not the hunting grounds beyond. An elven realm might ward a forest, guide riverside settlements, and impose graceful assumptions upon traffic, yet lose practical control the moment winter severed messenger chains or orcs found a neglected descent. A human coastal town might command a harbour effectively while knowing full well that 3 days inland, its writ dissolved into barter, fear, or whatever local chieftain could assemble 30 determined relatives. A tribe might regard a whole vale as ancestral range without maintaining a single wall upon it. An orc horde might conquer in one season what no farmer intended to surrender in 10 generations. Dragons, of course, do not concern themselves with the jurisdictional nuances of human record-keeping unless tribute has become irregular. Thus, from its earliest recoverable history, the North was not a blank awaiting order. It was overclaimed. That is an altogether different condition. A blank land invites settlement. An overclaimed land produces caution, violence, bargains, oaths, raids, tolls, stories, and the peculiar northern habit of distrusting anyone who says this valley belongs to us without immediately naming which us, by what force, under whose memory, and for how long through winter. If you wish to understand why the North produces stubborn people, begin not with their virtues, but with their arithmetic. The climate writes the first law, not because it is uniquely cold by the standards of all Toril, for harsher places certainly exist, but because its cold intersects with distance, uneven settlement, and intermittent infrastructure. A southern kingdom may survive incompetence by leaning upon density. Farms lie near roads, roads lie near towns, towns lie near storehouses, temples, mills, magistrates, inns, and a tolerably prompt sequence of neighbours who can be taxed, conscripted, preached at, or petitioned. But in the older North, distance was a political fact as much as a geographical one. A storm that halts traffic is not merely weather. It is a temporary rewriting of authority. It changes who can command, who can eat, who can heal, who can reinforce, and who can die unheard. Consider the simple road. Southerners are sentimental about roads in a way only the historically well-served can afford. They speak of roads as if laying stones upon earth were itself civilization. The North teaches something sharper. A road is not its paving. A road is its maintenance through freeze-thaw, washout, banditry, monster predation, bridge repair, patrol cost, and the willingness of enough people to keep using it despite risk. Many northern tracks were seasonal in practice, even when permanent in theory. What the summer caravan master called a route, the winter herdsman called a memory. Spring flood altered crossings. Autumn mud took wheels and mules with equal impartiality. Rockfall could redirect trade for a season. Ice rendered river passage swift or murderous depending upon judgment and luck, which are not identical commodities, though ambitious young men often confuse them. This is why northern settlements had, and retain, a different relationship to elegance. Where maintenance devours abundance, ornament must justify itself or become tinder for resentment. A keep whose crenellations look impressive but fail to shed snow is a monument to its builder's vanity. A lord who imports stained glass before ensuring grain storage has announced his intention to become folklore. In the North, utility acquires moral prestige. Not because northerners are incapable of beauty, but because beauty that does not survive weather is treated as a species of lying. The land reinforces the lesson. Mountains break communication. Forests conceal threats and shelter those who prefer not to be found. The trackless sea breeds mariners who learn quickly that trade and raiding differ less in seamanship than in theology. River valleys create ribbons of relative predictability and so become magnets for settlement, war, and long memory. Open country invites mounted movement and sudden predation. Dense woods grant cover to tribes, monsters, and those elven remnants who preferred not to be counted by human census-taking. Meanwhile, beneath all of it lie the older roads. Dwarven delvings, abandoned passages, natural caverns enlarged by commerce or desperation, and the innumerable underways through which trouble may move when the surface congratulates itself too loudly. Before later cities fix familiar names in the mind, the North is therefore best imagined as a zone of pressures rather than a map of borders. Pressure from winter, pressure from monsters, pressure from ancient ruins that attract scavenging or worship, pressure from migration, pressure from collapsing realms farther south or east, pressure from old roads that make wealth possible and invasion plausible along the same line. Pressure from memory, which is perhaps the most northern thing of all. One does not easily forget where the past closes, where the barrow stands, where the old elves vanished, where the dwarves once levied toll, where your grandfather's brothers disappeared in snow, or which valley seems empty until dusk and arrows. And yes, before you ask, the North had older claimants than the human cultures most listeners imagine first. It always does. That is one of the season's more reliable cruelties. Long before southern chroniclers began speaking of savage frontiers, there were northern civilizations of great refinement and equally great sorrow. Ilefan, for one, reached back to the first flowering, an elven city-state founded in unimaginably ancient days and centered eventually upon Taldar, where Waterdeep would one day rise. Eolan, founded much later in the founding time by Sharvan nobles amid the remnants of Arivandar's disaster, governed the Delimbia Vale and eastern High Forest for some 6 millennia. If you only know the North from later tavern songs, this may already feel improper. Elves are supposed to belong to woods in the abstract, not to long administrative continuities with capitals, roads, defensive projects, alliances, and carefully managed relations with neighboring powers. Yet that is what they were. The North remembers forests because forests survived. It forgets the states that ordered them because states, however elegant, are mortal. Ilefan is instructive because it shows just how deep the palimpsest runs. Its roots vanished so far back in time that many later human polities on the coast might as well have been campfire sparks by comparison. Taldar stood where Waterdeep would later develop, and the elves of Ilefan were sufficiently learned to be remembered not only for artistry and statecraft, but even for early formulations of natural philosophy. Imagine the scale of that continuity. Millennia of habitation, ritual, defense, diplomacy, and adaptation, later reduced in many human minds to the fact that a great city now stands there, and therefore history begins where the customs houses can enumerate it. It does not. When Ilefan later fragmented, when its peoples withdrew or transformed their political arrangements, they did not leave emptiness behind. They left foundations, old wards, altered terrain, hidden ways, remembered sacred places, and that most pernicious of legacies, The notion among later settlers that because the prior owners had ceased to administer openly, the land had somehow reverted to innocence. Human expansion along the Sword Coast north would benefit repeatedly from this mistake. One may farm a field over buried masonry without understanding why the ground drains so well. One may raise a hall in a place where the trees bend oddly and never ask what power once shaped them. One may call a ruined cellar natural stone until some locked season or unlucky excavation corrects the vocabulary. Eärlän offers the complementary lesson. Founded around -4700 DR, enduring for roughly 6,000 years, allied in its best periods with dwarven Delzoun, and at times influential enough to teach magic to the early Netherese, Eärlän belonged not to a fragile woodland dream, but to the hard labor of maintaining a realm on difficult ground. Its position in the Delimbir Vale and eastern high forest mattered tremendously. Here lay river access, forest shelter, approaches toward mountains, and the ever-recurring northern problem of monsters, raiders, and later human ambitions moving through the same channels trade required. Eärlän was not naive. No elven kingdom that lasts 6 millennia upon a frontier of orcs, dragons, and suspicious neighbors is naive. Grace and innocence are often confounded by those who have never had to defend a forest road in sleet. The elves of Eärlän dealt with the north as it was, by alliance, warding, martial readiness, and on occasion, calculated generosity. After Netheral's fall, they famously took pity on human refugees and sheltered many in Ascal's Horn, the fortress town that would become Ascalhorn. This act of mercy is often remembered sentimentally. It should also be remembered politically. A realm chooses whom to admit for reasons that mix compassion, calculation, kinship, risk, and hope. Eärlän made room for displaced humans not in a vacuum, but in a northern environment where useful allies, buffer populations, and disciplined settlers could matter deeply. That the experiment later turned tragic does not make the original choice simple. Ascalhorn itself is a northern parable, if ever there was one. Founded by the Eärlani in -372 DR on a jutting peak to protect their boundaries from orc hordes, it later passed largely into human hands under conditions, defend the realm, and abandon destructive Netherese magical habits. There, human and elven practices mingled uneasily. There, a frontier fortress became a center of magical learning. There, under pressures both external and internal, one may watch northern necessity and idealism attempt marriage. It ended, as some of you know, in demon-haunted catastrophe and the dreadful later name Hellgate Keep. But the point for our purposes is broader. The North does not preserve experiments gently. It tests them under stress until only the sound parts remain, and sometimes not even those. By the year of the curse, 882 DR, Eärlän itself collapsed under the combined burdens of demonic eruption from Ascalhorn, orc assault, and the weakening that came as more elves withdrew westward to Evermeet. Again, note the pattern. The North is not defeated by one enemy at a time. It is degraded by convergence. Several pressures arrive together, and a realm already stretched between roads, outposts, forests, and old obligations discovers that endurance has margins after all. What survives such collapses? Roads, though crumbling, ruined ports, hidden treasuries, family lore, ghost stories, political habits among successor peoples, fragments of alliance memory. A road through the high forest may outlast the court that ordered it maintained. A dwarven merchant generations later may know that some old stones by a ford mean elves once taxed crossing there. A human settler may clear land in what used to be an outer belt of patrol and never learn precisely why his cattle go uneasy near a certain mound. This is what I mean when I say the North is contested memory. Its later cultures live among remains too practical to ignore, yet too old or inconvenient to understand fully. If elven precedent gave the North one of its oldest civilizational layers, the dwarves gave it perhaps the most enduring infrastructure. Delzoun, the North Kingdom, rose around -3900 DR and endured until -100 DR, a dwarven dominion spanning much of the northwest and the North Dark beneath it. Do not imagine merely isolated holes glittering under mountains. Imagine a system: Citadel Felbar, Citadel Adbar, Citadel Sunbar in its earlier form, Ascor on the shores of the narrow sea to the east, trade routes under stone, hidden fastnesses, mines, forges, secondary halls, guard chambers, caravan ways, toll customs, kinship obligations, and the disciplined stubbornness without which no subterranean commonwealth endures 4,000 years. Delzoun was not quaint ancestry. It was one of the great ordering intelligences of the northern world. Here, perhaps more than anywhere, the North learned that civilization may be vertical. Surface peoples think laterally. They imagine territory spread over hills, roads, river bends and fields. Dwarves, especially Delzoun dwarves, understood that a mountain is not a barrier, but a storehouse, a fortress, a road junction, a treasury, a water system, and a memory palace, if you are patient enough to carve it properly. Their Fardrim, the underways of the North Kingdom, connected holdings across distances that would make a surface quartermaster mutter prayers into his ledgers. The Low Road, completed in -3416 DR, linked Delzoun's lands with Netheril by way of Ascor and other points of exchange. Beneath the weather, beneath banditry, beneath the fragile conditions of wagon travel, the dwarves made continuity out of stone. Observe the consequences. Trade no longer depended wholly on the seasonable goodwill of open ground. Metals, gems, forged goods and news could move by routes hidden from most surface threats. Wealth could be stored securely. Populations could retreat or redeploy. Outposts could be provisioned. Alliances with surface powers such as Netheril, Ilifan and Airlan could be sustained because the dwarves possessed an infrastructural confidence rare in the north. A people with roads beneath the mountains does not think about time as a farmer does. They think in repair cycles, clan succession or exhaustion, toll patterns, and the long usefulness of shaped stone. This is why dwarven history so often survives where human chronicles become ballads and then smoke. And yet even Delzoun did not master the north. No one does. For one thing, subterranean civilization has neighbors below as well as above. Orcs, goblinkin, worse things, older things, and later the long cascading consequences of underworld wars gnawed at the kingdom's margins. For another, surface links remained necessary. Mines require buyers. Buyers require safe exchange. Safe exchange requires defended approaches. A dwarf can keep a vault pristine for centuries and still lose the valley road that makes the vault economically meaningful. Still, Delzune's shadow across later northern history is immense. Citadel Adbar and Citadel Felbar endure in memory and stone alike. Sundarbar's old dwarven identity shaped its later role as a martial bulwark. Mirabar's wealth and metallurgical seriousness owe much to the broader northern dwarven tradition, even when human governance predominated. Everywhere in the north, where tools are respected more than rhetoric, where masonry is judged by generations rather than festivals, where a holdfast's worth is measured by what it can produce under siege instead of how elegantly it can host a midsummer masque, there the Delzune inheritance still murmurs. Even its fall instructs. In the years around -111 DR, orc assaults and related northern convulsions struck Delzune with terrible force. By -100 DR, the Greater Kingdom had collapsed, though several holds and surface settlements survived. Notice again the northern principle of fracture rather than clean ending. Kingdoms die, holds persist, roads are sealed rather than erased. Clan memory compresses empire into grievance. Citadel Sundbar survives through metallurgical brilliance and molten defense. Adbar and Felbar endure. The great underrealm contracts, and later generations inherit not one stable successor, but a pattern. Strong, isolated redoubts amid wider ruin. Is this not the very grammar of the North in later ages? A defended settlement here, a road there, wilderness between, old claim underfoot, and danger thick in the unadministered spaces. This is what later adventurers mistake for romance. It is, in truth, a map of interrupted logistics. Dwarven collapse also altered human imagination. When a surface people sees that even the mountain folk can lose ground, they do not conclude that history is hopeless. They conclude that survival must become local. Better a stout wall and 3 good storehouses than a grand imperial theory. Better a reliable smith than a distant court. Better a reputation for fierce response than elegant law no patrol can enforce by snowfall. Northern pragmatism is born, in no small measure, from watching great systems fail and choosing not to imitate their vulnerabilities. Now we turn from stone below to salt above. The human tone of the older North cannot be understood without Ilusk and the Iluskans. Their ancestors came from the west to settle Ruathim around -3100 DR, and by about -3000 DR, they had founded Old Ilusk at the mouth of the river Mirar on the Sword Coast north. This is among the earliest great human civilizations of Faerûn, and it deserves more respect than it usually receives from histories obsessed with flying cities and divine bureaucracies. Old Ilusk did not levitate mountains or command god-kings. It did something arguably more difficult in its environment. It survived by sea, clan, rune, and hard habit. Many of its early structures were wooden. Do not let that diminish it in your mind. Wood in the north is not primitiveness. It is available material, repairable material, maritime material, thermal material, and often strategically sensible material. A people who build in timber because timber suits their climate and labor patterns are not lesser than those who quarry marble for posterity. They merely do not flatter future archaeologists quite so well. Indeed, one reason Old Ilusk is less visible in surviving ruins is precisely because northern life often favors materials that answer the present well rather than eternity conspicuously. Fire, war, rot, and time ravage wood. Song and custom must therefore bear more of the civilizational burden. That is one reason skalds matter so much in northern cultures. When the hall burns, the memory must still walk. Old Ilusk stretched at its height from the Sword Mountains toward the spine of the world, though hemmed and pressured by neighbors, predators, giants, and the elven realm of Ilafan to the south. Its religion centered in beast totems. Its magic included runic practices, reportedly learned in part from giants and dwarves, a fact I savor for the way it displeases neat racial histories. The North has never cooperated with purity. Knowledge crosses boundaries under odd circumstances. A giant teaches rune lore. A dwarf shares a defensive method. An elf permits trade. A human adopts a custom, forgets its source, and later insists it is immemorial. Thus, culture forms. The Eluskans were seafarers. That fact cannot be overstated. Sea-facing peoples learn a double ethic. On the one hand, they become practical about movement, risk, weather, repair, and exchange. On the other, they become opportunistic about weakness. Trade and raiding grow from related competencies. A harbor is a market if greeted properly, and a target if defended poorly. The islands west of the Sword Coast, including Ruatim, and later many others settled by Eluskans, fed this maritime orientation. By -1000 DR, Eluskan expansion had reached numerous islands of the Sea of Swords. The cultural consequences are obvious. Tall, fair folk with hard eyes and a deep familiarity with coasts, oars, fish, storm, and feud. Then came catastrophe, as it so often does when the North has begun to look momentarily durable. In -2103 DR, a horde of giants, ogres, and orcs destroyed Old Ilusk. Netherese arcanists under Jeriah Kronos attempted aid and failed. The surviving people dispersed, some reportedly reverting to more barbarous patterns and later contributing to the stock of the Reg Headman. Pause there. An urban or organized people suffers civilizational collapse, and descendants preserve its memory in saga more than masonry. If you want to know why so much northern identity is oral, this is one of your answers. Repeated interruption teaches cultures to store continuity in persons rather than walls alone. It also leaves behind a peculiar ache. Old Ilusk remained in song and ancestral imagination, a lost beginning. Ruatim's later raiders remembered it. Uthgar would seek it. The notion of a northern people who once held a great coastal center lingered like a splinter in collective memory. Few political forces are more potent than a remembered place, half buried in legend. Some peoples found utopias in the future. Northerners more often find them in the smoke behind them. Centuries later, during the life drain crisis that foretold Netheryl's doom, refugees from the shadowed age of Netheryl migrated into the savage frontier. In -425 DR, an arch-wizard founded a new citadel city on the site of Old Ilusk and named it Ilusk in honor of the land's original settlers, dying in the effort. Here again, the North teaches the season's lesson of inheritance. New people arrive. They do not create from nothing. They build atop remembered ground. They borrow prestige from the dead because empty legitimacy is difficult to transport over long distance. This Netherese Ilusk, ruled by a magocracy called the Grand Cabal, was in many ways unlike Old Ilusk. Its rulers were arcanists. Its defenses included potent spellworks, and later the famous Host Tower of the Arcane, raised through immense sacrifice and designed in part to defend against looming threats from Faerûns and others. Yet the location mattered as much as the magical style. By choosing the old site, the Netherese inserted themselves into an existing northern memory. They became heirs, whether welcomed or not. And here, the North performed one of its characteristic fusions. Over time, the predominantly Netherese population intermingled with local Eluscans. The city retained elements of arcane governance and Netherese cultural trace, yet it stood in a region shaped by seafaring ancestry, suspicion of distant magic, harsh weather, and old clan memory. The result was unstable. You could build a magocracy there, yes. You could not assume the surrounding world had agreed that magocracy was the natural form of things. That tension became explicit in 95 DR when Uthgar Gardolfsson, son of the Thane of Ruatim, led his reavers eastward in search of the old Eluscan greatness preserved in skaldic memory. He found instead a Netherese-founded city where ancestral rumor said Ilusk should be. And being Uthgar, which is to say, being possessed of great ferocity, appetite for glory, and rather less patience for legal nuance than any stable government would wish in a founder, he assaulted the place. The image is almost too neat, barbarian memory crashing against wizardly inheritance, sea raider lineage rebuking magocratic occupation, the old human North, or one version of it, testing the legitimacy of the newer imported order by means of an axe. But history is rarely kind enough to present pure symbols. Uthgar's attack succeeded in slaying the leaders of Ilusk's magocracy, yet he was not acclaimed as liberator. The city's people, abandoned by those rulers, but not prepared to be ruled by a barbarian conqueror either, burned his ships and drove his followers inland. I have always admired the North's honesty in such moments. It is perfectly capable of hating two rival claimants at once. From that rejection came something even more consequential than conquest. Driven inland, Uthgar continued to war across the north, offering protection to those who swore to him. In 100 DR, he and his followers fought off an orc horde sweeping from the spine of the world. In 123 DR, he slew Gert, the lord of the Pale Giants, at the cost of his own life, and after death was sponsored by Tempus and granted divinity. His followers became the Uthgard, descendants of Uthgar, and the North acquired one of its defining human peoples. Now then, one must be precise here, because later urban histories and certain adventuring accounts have done the Uthgard the discourtesy of mistaking them for scenery with axes. The Uthgard are not merely generic barbarians haunting the margins of more respectable maps. They are a coherent cultural answer to northern conditions. Not the only answer, not always a gentle one, certainly not a uniformly admirable one, but an answer all the same. Their tribal organization, beast totems, oral tradition, territorial memory, ancestor mounds, suspicion of arcane magic, and mobile relation to land all express a political philosophy, whether or not its practitioners would phrase it so. First, territory. A city marks territory by walls, surveyed fields, charters, tax rolls, and towers from which armed men may see approaching trouble before the trouble sees their lunch. The Uthgard mark territory by use, oath, totem, memory, burial, and repeated return. A vale might belong to a tribe because its people hunted there, fought there, buried their honored dead there, recognized the local spirits, and could narrate the place through generations of deeds. To a settler arriving with plough and title, such claims appear infuriatingly intangible. To the tribe, the settler's title appears absurdly thin. What is a southern paper against the memory of 10 winters? What is a charter against a mound where your founder's bones lie? Thus, the North fills with conflicts that law alone cannot resolve, because the disputants are not merely competing for land. They are competing in different metaphysics of possession. Second, time. Settled powers assume continuity through structures: fortress, granary, temple, road, council chamber. The Uthgardt assume continuity through people and sacred places. This makes them look unstable to sedentary observers and stubbornly enduring to anyone who has watched cities burn. If a tribe must move, it moves. If one hunting range becomes untenable, another may be claimed or contested. If an enemy sacks a hall, the tribe is not thereby extinguished. It lives in kin, totems, speech, song, rites, and mounds. There is a cruel efficiency in this. Peoples whose social fabric travels can survive kinds of devastation that annihilate urban polities. Third, authority. The Uthgardt combine clan leadership, great chiefs, priests, shamans, and the mediation of totemic traditions under the divine figure of Uthgar himself. Outsiders often reduce the whole arrangement to brute strength. This is lazy. Strength matters, yes. It would be strange if it did not in the north. But ritual matters also. Totem beasts are not decorative mascots. They structure identity and moral temperament. Ancestor mounds are not merely tombs. They are points of continuity, sanctity, legitimacy, and territorial declaration. A tribe that returns to its mound is reaffirming law, though not the sort a Cormyrean magistrate would recognize. Fourth, memory. The Uthgardt remember in moving form. Their traditions are sung, recited, bodily enacted, renewed at sacred sites. Urban chroniclers find this untidy. I find it resilient. A written archive is a splendid thing, obviously, and I say this not merely because I inhabit one. But parchment burns, libraries flood, and conquerors make pyres out of philosophy with dispiriting regularity. Oral culture survives by human multiplication. So long as enough elders, scolds, shamans, and kin remain, a people's story can be rebuilt from mouths. It will shift. All memory shifts, but it will live. This is why the Uthgardt remained such a force across the northern lands. Tribe territories stretch broadly through the savage frontier and adjacent regions. The elk, grey wolf, griffon, red tiger, blue bear, black lion, thunder beast, sky pony, tree ghost, great worm, black raven, and others in different periods, each articulated some variation of northern life through totem and range. The names matter less to our present thesis than the structure itself. Multiple tribes, overlapping grounds, negotiated or violent boundaries, sacred sites, and an enduring refusal to let fixed settlement alone define legitimacy. It is fashionable in some circles to describe such peoples as anti-civilizational. This is inaccurate. They are anti-certain kinds of centralized, property-fixated, paperwork-loving civilization. They possess plenty of civilization of their own: social norms, kin structures, religious observances, jurisdictional customs, methods of warfare, rules of hospitality, and fierce expectations concerning proper conduct. One may disapprove of many of those norms and still grant the point. Civilization is not synonymous with masonry. Their suspicion of arcane magic, moreover, deserves sympathy even when it lapses into destructive prejudice. Why should Northern memory trust great wizards? Old Ilusk fell despite Netherese aid. Netherese arcanists built a magocracy atop ancestral ground. Ilusk's rulers abandoned their people when pressed. Later tales of Askelhorn, Hellgate and other disasters only deepened the lesson. In the north, magic that arrives with promises of order often leaves behind ash, monsters or account books more optimistic than reality. A tribe that prefers the seen strength of muscle, weather sense, spirit mediation, and proven leadership to the abstractions of high wizardry may be narrow, but it is not insane. Nor are the Uthgard the whole story of northern humanity. They coexist and contend with other human groups of Iluskan stock, with Northlanders of the islands, with mixed populations in growing towns, with dwarven enclaves, with scattered halfling steads, gnomish communities, elves both hidden and integrated, and all the unpleasant citizens of the wilder marches. Yet their cultural influence is enormous, because they embody a truth the urban north can never entirely suppress. Settlement remains contingent. The ploughman who mocks the barbarian may still pray that barbarian riders intercept the orc band before it reaches his fences. This brings us to one of the North's defining relationships, that between town and wilderness. In southern imaginations, wilderness lies outside civilization like a surrounding sea, dangerous but conceptually distinct. In the older North, the wilderness enters civilization daily. Wolves take livestock near town. Trolls use road verges. Orc scouts test outlying farms. Forest spirits react to logging not in abstraction, but in incidents. A dragon's chosen route becomes local politics whether the town council has voted on the matter or not. The nearest safe inn may be a day's ride in fair weather and unreachable in bad. Thus, every settlement develops a frontier mentality, even when legally it calls itself city, citadel, or kingdom. The city depends upon the wilderness more than it admits. Timber, furs, game, herbs, ore, charcoal, pasture, river access, hunting knowledge, hired scouts, tribal intermediaries, dwarven road wardens, elven passage rights. All these come from the supposedly uncivilized margin. Meanwhile, the wilderness depends upon the city in ways no less real, though less often acknowledged with grace. Salt, forged tools, grain in bad seasons, healing, market access, ransom exchange, religious goods, political leverage, mercenary employment. There is no clean line, only gradients of density and kinds of risk. This is why northern cities are rarely truly metropolitan in the southern sense, whatever their pride. Even when a place grows wealthy, armed and architecturally impressive, it remains answerable to the surrounding conditions. Mirabar may mine and trade with seriousness bordering on moral temperament, but it does so because mountain wealth, caravan defense, and dwarven skill make such seriousness necessary. Ilusk and later Luskan may command a harbour, yet never free themselves from the sea raider logic and haunted inheritance of the coast. Neverwinter, when it rises into prominence, will owe much to geography, hot river, harbour, and the ability to hold a pocket of urban continuity amid much rougher country. Waterdeep, farther south and more favoured, will often be imagined as an escape from the north, though its earlier roots still tie it to northern histories deeper than its mercantile self-flattery prefers. Never mistake the wall for the region. Northern walls are negotiating positions. A great many later heroic tales depend upon misunderstanding this. They imagine a town as a point of normalcy against abnormal danger. In truth, the town is a local concentration of managed danger. Its granary exists because wolves and winter threaten food. Its armory exists because raiders and monsters threaten peace. Its market exists because roads are dangerous enough to make central exchange preferable to dispersed vulnerability. Its tavern, for all the songs written in its honor, exists because travelers need shelter before the next stretch of exposure. Civilization in the north is not the absence of peril. It is peril budgeted. And so, the culture hardens accordingly. Harsh landscapes create stubborn peoples not by mystical influence, but through repeated selective pressure on custom. A household that cannot repair tools in snow season suffers. A village that fails to maintain common store against lean months suffers. A caravan company that hires charming fools instead of alert ones suffers. A lord who values ceremony over patrol suffers. Over generations, these sufferings sort habits. Hospitality becomes serious rather than decorative because travelers may die without it. Reputation matters because institutions are thin. Oath-keeping acquires weight because one cannot litigate every broken promise across 2 frozen ridges and a troll-frequented ford. Humor goes dry because excessive exuberance wastes breath and attracts idiots. Elegance is tolerated when earned. Competence is loved. This is not to say the North breeds virtue automatically. Nonsense. Hard conditions produce cruelty as efficiently as courage. Suspicion becomes xenophobia. Thrift becomes meanness. Self-reliance becomes a refusal to cooperate until disaster proves the point. Raiding becomes customary income. Mercenary work becomes respectable enough that children grow up treating violence as seasonal employment. Towns closed against the cold may close just as readily against refugees. The North makes many practical saints, yes, but it also makes a good number of excellent scoundrels who know exactly how long help will take to arrive and plan accordingly. Still, its cultures learn one lesson southern courts endlessly forget. Beauty is expensive, and survival costs first. Think of clothing. Northern garb privileges warmth, layering, durability, and repair. This shapes craft economies, gendered labor, and trade priorities. Think of houses, thick walls, smoke management, cellar use, roof pitch, animal shelter integration. Think of diet, smoked meats, root stores, hardy grains where possible, fish by river and sea, preserved foods, and the constant importance of salt. Think of animals, dogs as warning and work, horses where terrain permits, oxen or mules where wagons matter, reindeer or other local adaptations farther north, and an unsentimental relation to livestock because sentiment does not mend a winter ledger. Think of religion, deities of storm, war, sea, luck, agriculture, and endurance all find strong purchase where danger is seasonal and visible. Think of child rearing. A northern child learns weather, routes, tool use, and the names of local dangers earlier than a southern noble child learns rhetoric. And the child who does not learn may not become an adult worth classifying. This, more than any tavern image of roaring fires and bold boasts, is what makes the North. Useful habits, repeated under stress. Now let us return to the question of the frontier as contested memory, for here lies the heart of tonight's argument. When later kingdoms or urban chroniclers describe the North as frontier, what do they usually mean? They mean land not fully domesticated by their own administrative systems. Land where roads are unreliable, populations thin, taxation incomplete, local customs stubborn, and danger excessive. But such a definition centers the viewer's inconvenience rather than the land's history. Frontier to whom? Unsettled by whose standards? Wild relative to what prior order? To an Uthgard tribe, a valley may be ancestral range. To dwarves, the same valley may be the surface approach to a hold founded before the tribe's own remembered lineages took present shape. To elves, its trees may mark the remains of patrol belts from a vanished kingdom. To a human town charted 2 centuries ago, it may be crown land available for measured expansion. To orcs nesting in nearby caves, it is hunting reach. To a dragon, it is a scenic corridor between appetites. Which of these is frontier? Only the newest writer imagines the answer obvious. Maps worsen the problem. They encourage false singularity. A colored patch implies possession. A road line implies regularity. A named ruin implies inertness. Yet the North's truth is often layered simultaneously. A place can be a ruin, a sacred site, a bandit refuge, a dwarven emergency cache, and a profitable quarry, depending on who arrives first and with how many armed cousins. A road can be a trade route in summer, a raider lane in autumn, a death trap in winter, and a pilgrimage line in spring. A forest can be royal preserve in law, tribal hunting ground in practice, elven memory in spirit, and monster habitat by night. The North does not care for our single-entry catalogues. I naturally do, but I am an archivist. Places are not. That is why Northern identity emerges from repeated conflict more than from clean founding myths. Regions around inland seas, such as the Wilhelm of our last episodes and later the Sea of Fallen Stars, develop through commercial rivalry and maritime entanglement. The North develops through stubborn recurrence. The same pass, the same ford, the same burial mound, the same ruined tower reused by successively different nuisances, the same logging dispute between town and tribe, the same coastal inlet serving fisherfolk one decade and raiders the next. Over time, people say not merely we live here, but this is how one survives here. Culture condenses from repetition. It is worth pausing over the sea again, because the coast is where many listeners begin imagining the North, and where many misunderstand it most thoroughly. A southern port often imagines the sea as extension, a route outward toward richer markets, diplomatic contact, naval projection, or imperial conversation. A northern port imagines the sea as parent, rival, pantry, grave, and accomplice. The trackless sea and the Sea of Swords do not merely deliver trade, they school temperament. A mariner of Ruatim or the older Iluskan coast learns quickly that certainty is expensive and mercy intermittent. Ropes fray, hulls fail. Storms shift from inconvenience to theology in an hour. An island that trades 1 year raids the next if fish runs poorly or some ambitious thane needs prestige. The same longship may bear furs, amber, timber, and news on one voyage, then spearmen and torches on the next, and the crew will not always consider this ideological inconsistency. hence the persistent duality of northern coastal life. Trade and piracy are siblings who quarrel over manners, not methods. A harbour must know how to repair hulls, tally cargo, judge weather, spot sails at distance, intimidate rivals, and bargain under threat. These capacities are commercially useful whether one is calling oneself merchant, reaver, or patriotic private nuisance. Later, Luskan would elevate this ambiguity into civic temperament. But the pattern is older than Luskan and will likely outlive it by several regrettable centuries. One sees similar duality inland, merely translated into river and road. A northern river is not only water, it is a lane of relative predictability across uncertain ground. Settlements, therefore, accumulate near rivers not because northerners are unimaginative, but because movement, fishing, power for mills where possible, and access to trade all align there. Yet the same river that feeds a town also brings raiders, drifting corpses, spring flood, and news that arrives too late to matter. The Delimbir, Rovin, Dezaran, Surbrin, and Mirar, all in their different ways, taught the same lesson. Accessibility is vulnerability wearing an economic smile. So towns fortify, not merely with walls, though walls help. They fortify with habit, watches, horn calls, signals to outlying farms, reciprocal obligations between caravan masters and innkeepers, hidden stores, common drills, suspicious questioning of strangers who arrive under poor weather with too little luggage and too much confidence. I have sometimes thought that the most northern civic institution is not the council chamber or the market square, but the collective pause when locals all look toward the door because someone has entered unexpectedly during a storm. In such regions, soldier culture and merchant culture interpenetrate almost immediately. The merchant must think defensively. The soldier must understand supply. A caravan guard who cannot judge the value of his wagons is a decorative expense. A trader who cannot read the tactical implications of a defile, a timber line, or a badly timed fog bank is a philanthropist for bandits. Thus, many northern towns produce citizenries far more militarily literate than their southern counterparts, even when those citizens are not formally professional soldiers. They know what a wall costs. They know how much grain an escort consumes. They know that a patrol is not a theatrical gesture, but a subtraction from available labor and a wager against unseen threat. This economy of force affects class as well. In dense southern states, refinement can afford to despise manual competence. In the north, even the wealthy are often judged by whether their households understand practical matters. Does the hall have seasoned timber? Are the retainers any good? Are the storehouses dry? Can the Lord ride, shoot, endure weather, and recognize danger without a herald to introduce it? A noble who fails these tests may still be noble. He will simply be discussed with a frankness unavailable in more ceremonious climates. Northern contempt is usually terse and well-earned. Nor should we imagine the common folk as formless background. The North depends upon household capability in ways centralized lands often forget. A farmer's wife who can preserve food properly, mend winter gear, and identify rot early is performing strategic labor. A fisher who knows ice behavior and currents better than the young reeve sent to collect dews is more consequential than the reeve. A charcoal burner who understands forest and weather may matter more to a forging town than the poet laureate of some neighboring court, though the poet will of course receive finer seating. Children learn these hierarchies quickly. They may not articulate them in theory, but they know whose advice prevents funerals. This is why the North breeds a certain attitude toward expertise. It values competence that can be demonstrated under strain. A skald who remembers lineage accurately. A smith whose rivets do not fail in frost. A guide who returns with all the horses he was paid to protect. A midwife who can keep mother and child alive through storm isolation. A priest who does more than chant nicely when the plague cart arrives. All are honored. Titles without performance carry less weight because the land keeps issuing practical examinations. You may object that this sounds almost admiring. In places, yes, I am old, not blind. There is much to respect in a culture that learns to prize usefulness over bluster. Yet the same logic produces exclusions and brutalities its admirers should not romanticize. Outsiders are judged harshly because bad judgment kills. Magic is distrusted because some kinds of magic have indeed brought calamity. Those who cannot contribute may be neglected. Raiding against softer neighbors can be rationalized as admirable vigor. Women and men alike may be trapped by the sheer labor demands of subsistence and defense, leaving little room for gentler ambitions unless luck or wealth intervene. A frontier ethic may preserve communities. It may also narrow them until cruelty seems common sense. Now let us consider how specific later places emerged from these older conditions, for this is where the phrase before it becomes the North acquires its sharpest meaning. Take Neverwinter. Later generations know it as the city of skilled hands, the jewel of the North, a place of gardens improbably green through winter, crafted clocks, civic pride, and repeated catastrophe endured with almost theatrical insistence. But before such polish, the site stood within the long afterlife of Ilafan and its successor, Ilianbruen. In -10 DR, the elf hero Halueth never defeated Iluskans there and razed Castle Never. Then, as orc pressures and wider northern instability weakened older elven orders, human settlers from Ruatim spread into the region. In 87 DR, a small settlement called Igerstor grew around the castle. By 187 DR, it was renamed Neverwinter, a Chondathan rendering of its Iluskan name. There you have the whole northern process in miniature. Elven stronghold, human settlement, mixed linguistic inheritance, a defensible site at river and sea, gradual urbanization under pressure, no blank founding, only layered succession. Even Neverwinter's later prosperity never erased this structure. It was besieged by orcs more than once. It relied upon protection not only by its own strength, but at times by powers such as the gold dragon Palarandusk. In the 5th century DR, the Covenant of Wizards made the city a center for coordinated resistance against orc threats. Note that phrase, coordinated resistance. The North repeatedly builds institutions not from philosophical love of statecraft, but because orc hordes, giant movements, pirate aggression, and regional vulnerability eventually force cooperation upon proud settlements that would otherwise prefer autonomy. Neverwinter becomes civilized, yes, but in the northern sense. A city that knows peace must be defended by competence, alliance, and memory of prior ruin. Consider Sundabar. Beneath later wealth and hard-faced vigilance lay Citadel Sundbar, a dwarven hold of Delzoun built around -500 DR over the Everfire, a volcanic rift whose heat enabled extraordinary metalwork. Here again, the older north precedes the familiar one. A place later known as a human dwarven martial city begins as a dwarven engineering answer to geological opportunity. When Delzoun collapsed, Sundbar survived by the ingenuity of its master forgers, who raised molten defense against disaster. Centuries later, in 329 DR, orcs plundered the surface fortress. Monster attacks continued for generations. The city never forgot. Later, Sundarbar's suspicious, militarized, utility-driven character was not mere personality. It was history metabolized. If your forebears survived because they could forge, seal, and hold under extreme stress, you do not become frivolous merely because prosperity returns for a century or two. Mirabar furnishes another variation. Rich with mines, heavy in dwarven participation, ruled above by human forms, but in practice dependent upon a mixed human-dwarven political economy. It exemplifies how the North converts extractive wealth into guarded seriousness rather than opulence. Mirabar is rich, yes, yet its richness smells of ore, not perfume. Production quotas, mine defense, convoying, and the management of dangerous deeper levels define its public life. Even when it prospers, the city behaves like a place aware that all wealth must be hauled out of peril and protected from envy. Such places make hard bargains and harder faces. As for Ilusk and later Luskan, there the maritime ambiguity reaches almost comic honesty. Ilusk went through multiple destructions, occupations, and resettlements before Luskan eventually arose in 1302 DR, partly to separate the new city from the tragic burden of the old name. Yet names do not release places from character so easily. Built atop Ilusk's ruins at the Mirar's mouth, Luskan inherited not only a harbour, but a pattern. Trade entangled with piracy, local power fractured among dangerous captains, magical shadows lingering around the host tower, and the ever-renewed temptation to finance prosperity through methods respectable cities prefer to outsource. Later chroniclers may call it the City of Sails. A more candid title would be the city where the coast admits what many ports hide. And then, looming to the south as both participant and exception, there is Waterdeep. I do not intend to dwell there overlong tonight. The city deserves its own shelves and has stolen enough ink from humbler settlements already. But it matters as the southern threshold of northern logic. Its site was Elin Thaldar of Ilifan in Elder Ages. Beneath it lay Meler Bode and dwarven delvings. Later, human Waterdeep would become wealthy enough, populous enough, and institutionally dense enough to imagine itself something grander than a northern outpost. Often it is, yet never forget the roots. Its greatness did not spring from virgin hill and empty harbour. It rose where elves and dwarves had already recognized the significance of place. Even there, especially there, the city's sophistication stands upon inherited judgment. The more familiar the later map becomes, the easier it is to miss this. One sees named cities and imagines historical arrival. In truth, the north became legible to later Faerûn only when enough layered inheritances hardened into recurring nodes. Neverwinter, Luskan, Mirabar, Sundarbar, Silvery Moon farther east in time and intention, Waterdeep as the great southern hinge, and the many lesser towns, holds, steads, ferries, and ruins that fed or resisted them. The North becomes the North only after outsiders can point to a necklace of places and pretend the wilderness between is merely background. Before that point, the region is experienced as linked hazard more than settled country. This matters for the age of wandering companies far more than many chroniclers admit. Why does the North produce so many tales of small companies walking into old places with uncertain backing and an unreasonable number of torches? Because the North structurally requires freelance competence. Its states and towns are too thinly spread to monopolize danger. Its ruins are too numerous to ignore. Its roads are too vulnerable to guarantee official response. Its local powers are too jealous to coordinate perfectly. Its old wealth lies in too many inconvenient places. Thus, between the organized and the ungoverned appears a class of mobile problem solvers, treasure seekers, scouts, sellswords, guides, hedge mages, and pious meddlers whom later ages call adventurers, with a mixture of gratitude and concern. The North, more than many regions, makes them necessary. A ruined Delzun outpost needs surveying because monsters have emerged from its lower galleries. A tribal dispute threatens a caravan route both towns insist is theirs by law and others insist is theirs by memory. A dragon has settled near an abandoned watchtower on an old Airlanny road. Orc movements in the spine suggest a pass will become unusable unless someone acts before spring caravans. A haunted stretch of the ruins of Ilusk has begun spitting undead close enough to inconvenience commerce. A merchant factor wants a shortcut verified through lands the locals say are sacred, cursed, or worse, politically complicated. No crown has agents enough for all this. No city council wishes to spend its guard on every rumor. So the North pays outsiders, semi-outsiders, second sons, stubborn daughters, pious eccentrics, and hopeful fools to intervene. Do you see now why danger there feels so intimate? Not because the North is morally purer than other regions, because its spacing leaves work undone. The gaps between institutions become story. This is also why northern legend accrues around roads as much as around courts. Elsewhere, history may center on palace and temple. In the North, crossroads and passes often carry greater narrative weight. Dead Orc Pass, the Mirar Mouth, the routes through the high forest, the approaches to the spine, the ferry points, the old barrow sites, the logging tracks that become war paths after dark. These are the places where systems meet resistance. A palace can command. A pass can refuse. Never underestimate the political intelligence of geography. There is another reason the North keeps returning in later tales, and it is less comfortable. The region preserves usable pasts, not safe pasts, usable ones. Dwarven ruins still hold craft and treasure. Netherese traces linger in some cities and hidden caches. Elven sites remain warded, mourned, or half forgotten. Uthgard mounds preserve sanctity and peril. Ancient roads still occasionally work. Old grudges remain active enough to recruit with. A later kingdom standing atop such deposits becomes an engine for recurrent conflict because the dead have not fully surrendered their tools. Each generation finds some new way to pry open an inheritance it only partly understands. If that sounds like the governing principle of our season, it is because the North illustrates it with almost vulgar clarity. And then there is the matter of tone. A land may shape behavior not only through what it requires, but through what it teaches people to expect emotionally. In the older North, confidence is always provisional. Even joy often carries contingency. Feast while the stores are good, marry while peace holds, trade while the pass remains open, build while the orcs are elsewhere, take wages while the captain still has coin, plant because one must, not because the gods owe harvest. This does not make Northerners gloomy by default. Some are boisterous, affectionate, absurdly hospitable, and scandalously fond of song. But beneath the mood lies a constant calculation. How long will this condition last? That question breeds a particular kind of wisdom, also a particular kind of cynicism. It is why Northern humor goes dry, why boasting becomes both entertainment and warning, why oaths matter so much. When conditions shift quickly, the word one person gave another may outlast walls. Why grudges endure? One remembers exactly who failed to send help through snow. Why reputation travels farther than banners. Why mercenary service seems less shameful than in more stable lands. Everyone understands that skilled violence is a resource, regrettably but undeniably. Why hospitality to the deserving guest can be fierce even where xenophobia toward unknown strangers is equally fierce. The North is not morally consistent. It is situationally intense. You can see the same intensity in its relation to memory of the dead. Ancestor mounds among the Uthgard, dwarven dirges and clan recitations, Eluskan skaldic remembrance of lost Ilusk, elven mourning for vanished realms and corrupted strongholds, human tales of ruined keeps, half-haunted roads, and the valley where so-and-so made his stand. The North does not easily separate landscape from death. Too many routes pass old battlefields. Too many steadings reuse old stones. Too many winters reveal bones. In more generously populated lands, the dead may be conceptually assigned to cemeteries and dynastic mausolea. In the North, they keep interfering with property descriptions. This, I suspect, is one reason I find the region sympathetic. It refuses to pretend that the dead have ceased participating merely because the living are busy. Let us make the matter still plainer by following for a moment not a king, not a thane, not an arch-wizard, but a household. Imagine a family arriving in the Delimbir Vale generations after an older realm's retreat. Not first settlers absolutely, for there are no such creatures in Faerûn outside of myth and exceptional geological misfortune. Rather second or third or 10th settlers, which is what most people truly are. They come with oxen, iron tools, children who have outgrown the last holding, 2 mules, a little seed grain, a charter perhaps from some petty lord farther south, or perhaps only the assurance of kin who went before them that there is land enough if one is willing to clear brush and keep watch. On the map, the place may look open. In practice, it is dense with prior meaning. The trees stand unevenly because an old patrol road once ran there, though it is now covered in root and leaf mold. The rise chosen for the new hall is dry because dwarven drainage stones lie buried below, forgotten by everyone but one passing trader who notices their shape and says nothing. A nearby hill, convenient for grazing, is avoided by local guides after dark because it contains a Uthgard mound, though the newcomers at first take this for rustic superstition. The stream floods less violently than expected because long-dead elves altered its banks. The woods to the west provide excellent timber, but also mark the hunting range of a tribe that does not recognize the charter. A cave 2 miles off contains goblins. Another, farther and deeper, used once to connect to something Delzoun carved and later sealed. There may be coin in that history. There may also be a death no one can afford. Tell me then, is this frontier? Or is it an archive so thickly shelved that the new family simply lacks the catalogue? Such households make the North. They live in negotiation with dead engineering, living rivals, uncertain authority, and the punitive indifference of season. Their children grow up learning which claims matter in practice. The Lord's tax collector matters, yes, on the days he can arrive. So does the neighboring village's need for allies when wolves or raiders strike. So does the tribe whose sacred ground one ought not cut across in ignorance. So does the dwarven factor who knows which old tunnel is still stable. So does the priest who can mediate a feud before it turns the only nearby bridge into a murder site. Political education in the North is therefore experiential. It is not that people reject abstraction. It is that abstraction rarely survives first contact with frozen mud. This is one reason ethnic and cultural identity in the North tend toward intermixture without ever achieving serenity. Eluskan blood spreads through coastal towns, islands, interior villages, and later cities. Uthgard traditions remain distinct while interacting constantly with non-tribal neighbors. Regedmen preserve other strands of old northern humanity farther afield. Netherese refugees contribute lineages and habits in pockets. Jondathan and later Tetherian settlers enter some regions through trade and migration. Dwarves are not merely foreign merchants, but co-residents, political participants, and sometimes indispensable partners in mining, smithing, and defense. Elves may be hidden neighbors, integrated notables, or distant memories still governing practical choices of route and place. Halflings slip into the edges in their own fashion, more tenacious than they are usually credited for. Gnomes, too, appear where craft or concealment suit them. The result is not a melting pot, as some optimists like to say, when they have not personally had to mediate a timber rights dispute between 3 species and 2 legal traditions. It is a layered coexistence shaped by necessity. Northwestern Faerûn rarely offers the comfort of ideological purity. Everyone needs something from someone else. The town needs dwarven metalwork and tunnel knowledge. The dwarves need grain, drovers, and surface intermediaries. The caravan master needs guides and scouts. The tribal chief may need access to smiths or negotiated passage in hard winter. The elf, whether hidden or civic, may need human hands for projects too broad to manage alone or allies against a threat awakening in old ruins. This interdependence does not produce harmony by itself. Often it produces well-informed irritation, yet it helps explain why the North's societies, for all their roughness, are often more practically plural than their rhetoric suggests. Life is too difficult to exclude every useful neighbor. Of course, when pressure intensifies, pluralism can collapse into scapegoating with depressing speed. Hard times strip polish from tolerance. But even then, the memory of interdependence remains. This is why northern cities often recover from ethnic tension faster than more ideologically rigid realms. Necessity embarrasses prejudice eventually if enough goblins arrive at the gate. Law in the north reflects similar conditions. In regions with thin administrative reach, Law cannot rely entirely on distant codes. It becomes composite. Royal decree where a crown truly has reach. City ordinance where walls and markets concentrate power. Clan custom within dwarven or tribal communities. Church judgment where respected temples hold influence. Negotiated compensation where enforcement would cost more than settlement. Reputation threaded through all of it. A southern jurist may find this untidy. A northern widow, merchant, or reeve usually calls it Tuesday. Consider what happens when cattle vanish. In a dense realm, one expects officials, evidence, perhaps a magistrate, perhaps a sheriff. In the north, the possibilities proliferate. Wolves, rustlers, goblins, a tribe claiming trespass and seizing animals as warning, a hungry ogre, some local lordsmen acting unofficially, a debt reprisal. Without strong institutions, households learn not only to endure, but to investigate. They track, they ask, they compare rumors at inns, they note who bought fresh meat suddenly, they study boot prints. And if justice requires violence, it is often delivered by whoever can gather force quickest. This is not elegant governance, it is governance adapted to distance. That adaptation shapes morals. Northern people are often thought blunt because climate discourages ornament. True enough, as far as it goes. Yet the deeper reason is jurisprudential. Where information may arrive late and action must often be taken before perfect certainty, speech tends toward directness among those who hope to be understood quickly. This does not mean Northerners are incapable of subtlety. They gossip, dissemble, negotiate, and insult with the best of them. But when matters become serious, the rhetorical fog clears fast. Can you fight? Will you lend grain? Was it your cousin? How many came through the pass? Did you see the tracks? Such questions do not benefit from courtly embroidery. The same directness influences religion. Northern devotion is often practical without being shallow. Gods are not only adored, they are consulted regarding harvest, storm, battle, safe passage, healing, forge luck, and the management of fear. Tempus, Umberlee, Shantea, the Morn Din Saman, local beast totems, and later many others all acquire distinctly northern coloration, where worshippers experience the world as recurrent hazard. Piety does not become less sincere because it is useful. On the contrary, a prayer spoken over a storm-tossed deck or a winter birthing bed often carries more honest theology than a duke's polished temple speech. The North keeps religion close to weather, blood, and work. And because it does, it also keeps sacrilege close. A barrow robbed is not merely a property crime. A shrine neglected in hard season may feel like communal treachery. An oath sworn falsely before the wrong witnesses can poison a district's trust for years. Southerners sometimes laugh at northern superstition. Then they walk carelessly near an ancestor mound, or mock a local taboo about a standing stone, or camp in the wrong ruin, and learn that what one culture calls superstition, another calls accumulated empirical caution, wearing sacred language. This returns us to the problem of ruins. Throughout this season, I have insisted that ruins are not all alike. Some are memory, some are treasure, some are warning, some are legal claims made by the dead. In the North, these categories overlap so frequently that one cannot responsibly separate them for long. A ruined watchtower on a ridge might look to a young adventurer like Prophet with stairs. To nearby villagers, it is where wolves den, unless smoke appears at midsummer, which means something older has woken. To a dwarf, it may mark the vanished surface companion post of a deeper root still whispered about in clan stories. To an elf, it may be the place where an oath was broken in the waning days of Eirlan. To a tribe, it might stand within territory no one settled politely was ever granted. If some ambitious local lord sends masons to reuse its stone without consultation, what follows is not merely renovation. It is the rearrangement of memory by force. The north is littered with such rearrangements. Stones from older halls appear in newer keeps. Cairns are robbed to build sheep walls. Old dwarven culverts are integrated into human cellars. Elven roads become logging tracks. Barrows acquire shrines from newer faiths. Sometimes this is adaptation born of necessity. Sometimes it is desecration committed under the name of improvement. Most often it is both, depending which side of the ledger one inherited. That is why the North feels haunted, even where no incorporeal being is present. The living continually reuse the dead's arrangements and then wonder why the result carries moral static. I have lived long enough to observe that many later northern polities cultivate selective amnesia about this process. They celebrate hardy founders while omitting the prior peoples displaced, absorbed, bargained with, or quietly built upon. They praise taming the wild when what they actually did was seize, restore, repurpose, or reinterpret older systems under new management. That pattern is not uniquely northern, to be fair. Most states are autobiographical frauds to some degree. But the North makes the fraud harder to sustain because the evidence lies so close to the surface. One harsh winter can expose an old paved way. One careless excavation can uncover a crypt. One troll attack can drive settlers toward a cave mouth whose stonework proves the land was managed long before their grandfathers drew lots for it. And this, finally, is why the word frontier should always make you suspicious when pronounced too proudly. It often means we have not yet finished pretending the previous chapter does not matter. There is a political convenience in treating the North as unfinished. An unfinished land seems available. It can be colonized, improved, taxed, evangelized, mined, heroically defended, or romantically escaped into. A finished land, one dense with prior claim, requires negotiation, humility, or conquest honestly admitted. Few regimes enjoy such honesty, so they speak instead of taming, bringing order, opening roads, civilizing marches. Sometimes these phrases correspond to real public goods. I'm not sentimental enough to deny that roads, granaries, monster clearance, and stable trade can improve lives. But listen carefully for what is omitted. Whose road replaced whose path? Whose order displaced whose law? Which monsters were cleared and which merely hired? What old site was paved over? Who benefited from the new toll? The North answers such questions in blood, coin, and weather. Its people know that every improvement costs someone labor and someone memory. This perhaps explains the region's enduring ambivalence toward lords and crowns. A strong ruler can indeed stabilize a district, hold passes, fund patrols, adjudicate disputes, and coordinate against threats no village can face alone. But strength from afar also means taxes, conscription, priorities set by those who do not freeze locally, and policies made in halls too well heated to understand why an extra levy of grain is not merely inconvenient, but murderous. Thus, northern peoples often want authority and resent it simultaneously. They desire protection without suffocation. They welcome roads and hate tolls. They admire powerful rulers only so long as those rulers remain recognizably useful. This is not fickleness. It is frontier accountability. And yes, it makes durable monarchy difficult. Which is one reason our next episode turns so profitably toward Cormyr. There you will see a realm that solved, or at least managed, some of these problems by building thicker institutions. Crown, nobility, war wizards, purple dragons, law, and a forest kingdom's disciplined bargain between authority and local power. In many ways, Cormyr is the anti-North. Or perhaps more precisely, it is what happens when a region facing danger insists upon becoming legible to itself before the danger can permanently define it. But we are not there yet. We are still among the northern shelves, where even the archive seems to settle more heavily when certain names are spoken. Ilusk, Delzoun, Aerlan, Uthgar, Neverwinter before its roses, Sundabar before its confidence, Waterdeep before its self-importance, chests of iron tools lashed for caravan, oars stacked for spring, a cloak mended a third time because cloth is dear, a mound ringed with stones under snow, a child learning the path to the winter cellar by touch in darkness, a skald reciting the fall of old Ilusk to an audience that half thinks it history and half inheritance, a dwarf sealing a tunnel because prudence is wiser than curiosity, an elven scout watching smoke from a new human hall and deciding, for now, not to intervene, a reeve counting arrows because speeches do not replenish quivers. This is the North before the legends make it tidy. And because I am unwilling to let the later bards have the last word, let us state the thesis again with proper severity. Northern culture does not arise despite danger. It arises because of danger. Because winter punishes negligence. Because distance humiliates authority. Because roads fail and therefore must be respected, repaired, and defended. Because ruins remain active participants in daily life. Because the dead retain legal, spiritual, and practical claims. Because tribes, towns, holds, ports, and forests all insist that land is more than acreage. Because trade and violence share roots. Because utility earns moral authority where beauty alone freezes. Because institutions are thin and therefore persons, reputations, households, and local competence matter disproportionately. Because no settlement is ever quite finished. This is why later stories set in the Sword Coast North feel the way they do. The inn on the road matters because the road is dangerous. The town council matters because the town is exposed. The wandering company matters because official reach is incomplete. The ruined tower matters because the dead built close enough to trouble the living. The local hunter, smith, priest, trapper, ferryman, or midwife matters because the landscape will punish anyone who mistakes abstract rank for practical knowledge. The great city matters only to the extent that grain, tools, law, and armed force can still move outward from it before the weather changes, or the pass closes, or the orcs come down again. That last clause, by the way, is another northern constant. The orcs come down again, or the trolls, or the giants stir, or the dragon wakes, or the barrow cracks, or the pass is lost. Northern life is cyclical in its threats and cultures built under cyclical threat learn to think less in final victories than in intervals of reprieve. This can make them seem conservative, even grim. But it also makes them hard to surprise. A people who regard peace as a maintained condition rather than a natural state are better prepared when history resumes its coarser habits. And if this all sounds exhausting, it is. Do not romanticize fatigue either. Many leave the north if they can. Many are buried young. Many settlements fail and are remembered only by a low rise, a rotten fence line, or a place name surviving in an entail. The region's greatness lies not in turning hardship into poetry, though it does that well enough. Its greatness lies in producing durable human and demi-human responses to conditions that would otherwise reduce life to improvisation. It teaches people how to build partial order and maintain it without ever quite believing order has become permanent. That is a hard wisdom. It is, I think, better than optimism. So when later chroniclers speak of the North with affection, suspicion, nostalgia, or commercial opportunism, hear beneath their voices the older truth. They are naming not a single realm, but a long education. The education of stone by frost, of timber by wind, of roads by season, of cities by wilderness, of households by hunger, of memory by ruin, of pride by repeated correction. Few regions instruct so sternly. Fewer still leave such useful graduates. If I were forced, and only force could compel such vulgar simplification, to distill the older North into a handful of propositions suitable for engraving above a gate, I might choose these. First, no claim endures there without maintenance. Not land claim, not road claim, not dynastic claim, not sacred claim, not trade dominance, not civilized reputation. The North erodes all of them unless renewed by action. A tribe must return to its mounds and grounds. A city must keep its walls, patrols, and storehouses. A dwarven hold must maintain its passages and alliances. An elven ward must be tended or withdrawn with consequence. Even memory must be rehearsed, sung, recited, and embodied, lest it thin into myth and then into cheap legend. Maintenance in the North is legitimacy made visible. Second, every refuge there is also a target. A keep draws those who seek safety and those who resent it. A rich mine attracts trade and envy. A harbor attracts commerce and raiders. A fertile valley attracts settlers and claimants. A wizard school attracts students and enemies, as Neverwinter learned when the Covenant's struggle against Orcish threat widened into feud and counterstroke. A famous road attracts wagons and ambushes. There is no protected status conferred merely by usefulness. Usefulness is advertisement. This is why northern peoples so often cultivate hard exteriors around necessary things. If it matters, someone will come for it. Best to be ready before they announce themselves. Third, ruin is never singular. When a settlement falls in the north, it leaves several ruins at once. There is the physical ruin, wall, mine, collapsed roof, blackened timbers. There is the social ruin, scattered kin, broken patronage, interrupted marriages, apprenticeships ended, debts frozen or transformed into vendettas. There is the economic ruin, roads diverted, caravans recalculated, tolls lost, local crafts dispersed. There is the religious ruin, shrines abandoned, vows unanswered, holy sites profaned or reinterpreted. And there is the narrative ruin, the story later told about why the place fell, by whom and for whose instruction. Later generations inherit all of these, though they usually notice only the stone. This is why the North breeds archivists of unusual practical value. Not merely scribes in cloisters, but skalds, mounds keepers, rune readers, line reciters, caravan elders, temple recorders, old trappers who know where villages used to be, dwarven lawmasters who can tell which sealed door ought not be opened by examining a hinge, and those rare city officials whose minds remain sufficiently attached to reality that they ask what stood here before approving construction. The North punishes forgetfulness physically. That makes memory, even humble memory, a survival skill. You may perhaps begin to see why I am fond of it. A people living among recurring ruins must grow either wiser or extremely repetitive. The North manages a curious blend of both. It repeats errors, certainly. It glorifies raiders who become local ancestors. It lets cities grow complacent beneath the illusion that one generation's prosperity has changed the region's nature. It underestimates wilderness whenever the markets have had too many good years. It misuses old magic. It insults tribes and then expresses shock when the insult becomes martial. It allows petty rivalry to sabotage needed coordination. It confuses toughness with insight and suspicion with prudence. I would not trust the North to learn permanently from any lesson, because no human or dwarven or elven society does. But it does remember enough. Enough to rebuild differently after some falls. Enough to recognize old dangers when they reappear under new names. Enough to keep the stories of vanished powers accessible to those willing to listen. Enough that later adventurers can still walk into a ruin, and if they have the sense to ask locally before unsheathing greed, hear 3 or 4 living versions of what the place means. That, in a world like Faerûn, is a kind of miracle. The North remains fertile ground for stories not merely because it contains danger, but because danger there is historically layered. A ruined tower is never just a monster den. It is also a trace of a realm, a failed promise, a buried border, a sacred violation, a lost toll station, a family tragedy, or an artifact cache whose presence explains why 3 different factions are suddenly pretending to take interest in local banditry. The wandering company that enters such a site is not trespassing into empty excitement. It is stepping into unfinished politics. That is the key distinction. In lesser fantasy, ruins are scenery, and monsters are furniture. In the North, ruins are arguments. Monsters are often merely the latest tenants. When one understands this, the whole region sharpens. The innkeeper is not merely a keeper of ale, but the inheritor of local memory, whose grandfather saw the last attempt to clear the barrow and has opinions about how many priests it requires. The surly blacksmith is not ornament, but the descendant of dwarven methods filtered through human town practice, entirely justified in rolling his eyes at young warriors who think a sword is purchased rather than maintained. The tribe across the ridge is not scenery for someone else's heroism, but an enduring political presence whose claim predates the charter being brandished by today's timber consortium. The ruined chapel in the woods is not only haunted, but evidence of the frontier's repeated failure to hold institutional continuity under pressure. I sometimes suspect This is why so many listeners love Northern tales, whether or not they consciously grasp the structure. The region makes history legible through pressure. One feels, even in a single roadside incident, that older layers press up through the scene. A caravan attack suggests trade networks. A trade network suggests roads. Roads suggest earlier builders, territorial negotiation, tolls, and military need. Military need suggests monsters, tribes, rival cities, ancient grudges, or failing patrols. Soon enough, the humble roadside quarrel opens into civilizational anatomy. This pleases me immensely. Small scenes should have deep roots. Otherwise, they are anecdotes, not history. And so I caution you as ever against romance. Do not say the North is noble because it is hard. Hardness alone proves nothing except abrasion. Do not say frontier life is free. It is constrained by weather, scarcity, threat, and memory as tightly as any court is constrained by protocol. Do not say the North is simple. A place where 5 prior claims may exist under one field is not simple. Do not say its peoples are closer to truth because they live nearer danger. Some are. Some are merely closer to weapon racks. Distinguish carefully. What the North offers, if one listens properly, is not purity but clarity. It strips away the fantasy that civilization begins where administration becomes confident. It reminds us that roads, storehouses, mounds, shrines, and ruins are all forms of political speech. It teaches that the wilderness around a city is never truly outside the city's history. It shows how cultures become practical without becoming uniform, how plural coexistence may be forged by necessity rather than ideology, and how old catastrophes remain active long after the last official chronicle has shelved them. That is enough, more than enough if one is wise. Before we close, let me leave you with the questions this region ought to plant in the mind. When you see a northern ruin, do you ask who built it, or who keeps others from forgetting it? When you hear a road described as open, do you ask open to whom, under whose protection, and at what season? When a town calls the land beyond its palisade wild, do you ask whether the word conceals ignorance, fear, convenience, or ambition? When a tribe is named barbarian, do you ask what settled people gain by saying so? When a city praises itself for standing against the dark, do you ask what bargains, old roads, buried allies, and inherited stone made that stance possible? And when a map labels a region simply the North, will you be content with a direction? Or will you remember that beneath that single convenient word lie elves, dwarves, seafarers, refugees, raiders, tribes, ruined kingdoms, old tunnels, sacred mounds, and the long labor of households trying to survive where certainty never lasts long enough to become smug? I hope the latter. Smugness freezes badly. Next time, we leave the looser grammar of the frontier and turn toward one of Faerûn's most durable arguments for disciplined monarchy. We go south and east to Cormyr, the Forest Kingdom, where crown, noble house, war wizard, purple dragon, and common expectation are forced into a tighter bargain than the North has ever comfortably tolerated. If tonight has shown you what happens where institutions remain thin and danger educates every household personally, the next episode will ask what becomes possible when a realm decides it will not merely survive the wild pressure around it, but organize itself against that pressure with law, habit, and statecraft. Come prepared for a different smell in the archive. Less salt and old fur, more parchment, cavalry leather, and the resin of well-managed forests. Do not mistake that for softness. Ordered realms bleed too. They simply keep better ledgers of the matter. The archive at taleofthelich.com remains open to you, shelves lit, timelines arranged, and the dust constrained to the amount proper for an institution of dignity rather than the sort that suggests either neglect or exuberant poltergeist activity. The website is live, and that pleases me. A good archive should not only preserve the past, it should teach the living how to stop tripping over it with such expensive surprise. Merch is coming soon as well. I remain, I confess, mildly fascinated by the mortal urge to commemorate solemn historical inquiry upon garments, vessels, and other portable objects. Yet, if such tokens help carry old questions into new rooms, I shall not object overmuch. History has survived stranger vehicles. I have catalogued several, though not all were washable. This episode was brought to you by Dharma Web Solutions. For clear, durable, maintainable web design and development, visit dharmawebsolutions.com. If you require structures that can survive growth, revision, competing interests, layered permissions, and the inevitable strain produced by real people doing real things in real numbers, choose builders who understand that maintenance is not an afterthought. It is the form durable care takes once the ceremonial ribbon has been cut and history begins using what was built. Until then, keep your candles trimmed, your boots mended, your maps annotated, and your admiration restrained whenever anyone uses the word frontier as though it were a natural condition rather than a confession of incomplete understanding. I am Irillian Cantonine. This has been the Lich's Tale. And remember, ruin is not the same as forgetting. Forgetting begins when the road is treated as more real than the older path beneath it, the charter as more sacred than the mound beside it, the town wall as proof of mastery over the wild beyond it, and a whole burdened region is reduced to a direction because learning its true names would require more humility than the speaker possesses.